Hello everyone, this is Aegon of Astora, and welcome back to Bloodborne Let's Talk Lore. This is episode 11, being recorded on Wednesday the 30th of September. I hope that you're having a fantastic day, whenever it is that you find yourself watching this. It's only just now that when I read out the date, that I realized how long it's been since I've last recorded. I believe that I last recorded on September 2nd for this particular series, and I'm very sorry, but there are reasons why I've been unable to record nearly as frequently as I imagine I would be able to in the last days of summer, when the reality of the current academic year and my workload therein was not yet abundantly clear. But with all that said, I did make a video update on the subject of where I've been and why the content has slowed down so much. And you can click on the lower right hand side of your screen to check that out if you haven't already seen it. I do also discuss in that channel update my plans for Bloodborne: The Old Hunters. Put simply, I plan on live streaming my blind playthrough of the new content of the expansion, and B, to incorporate it into this playthrough. 100% sure that is something I'm going to do, but what form that incorporation takes, how I'm going to incorporate it into the playthrough, I can't say really until such times I'm able to actually experience the content and actually figure out what it entails and how it alters the lore. Because I'm certain that there will be many things that it will change many things, our perceptions of many things, in such a way that, we will have to revisit certain subjects, perhaps certain places, but you can rest assured that either way, we will certainly be going through the content in the context of this playthrough, even if that means, say, having to go to New Game Plus once we've completed once we've reached the end of this playthrough. No matter what I'm trying to say is that no matter what, we will be dealing with the Old Hunters when the time comes. But for now, we have the Forbidden Woods still to deal with. Funnily enough, just thinking about the time scale involved in the game, in the playthrough, and in the amount of time that has lapsed in between episodes, I feel like we've been in the Forbidden Woods, or that we've had access to the Forbidden Woods at least for, feels like eons, but really hasn't been that long, I don't think. So in terms of specific things that we want to accomplish here, I'm not really sure. And this was Twin Bloodstone Shards. I can't recall if I picked that up on camera or not, but if I didn't, that's what that was. Those are Twin Bloodstone Shards. But yeah, we're going to do in this episode that which we've done in pretty much every other one, but perhaps with an additional level of uncertainty, in that we're just going to proceed through the area and stop and talk about things that we find interesting. And speaking of which, I can't recall what these guys are called in the guide. The snakes throughout the Forbidden Woods, there are two different variants. There is the snake ball and the large snake ball, as they're described in the guide. And even though we don't find these, I think they're infected huntsmen or something like that. I will have to look at my guide to clarify that. But you'll recall that, we did talk about these huntsmen, so to speak, because I'm not sure if they can even really be classified as such, and what their deal is. I did receive an interesting comment from Nicole Neolucky Dubois, who writes that I think the sack over the man's face is writhing about in the same way they do with snakes. And that she is speaking from experience when she says that, she's sure to point out. There is some obvious movement in there that doesn't seem to be just cloth physics. I think they're present before they explode out of his neck/face, and he's just a simple host body for a parasite. The snake designs, although cool, really throw me off in the game. One of the only enemies that sticks out, but I really hope to glean some more information off them as you play in the woods soon. And about a week prior to that, we also had a comment from Rix, who writes in a similar vein, "What's the deal with all the snakes in the Forbidden Woods? It is so out of line with the rest of the story, as snakes aren't the typical thing you think of when someone mentions the word beast. The Shadows also summon snakes only in that area. I don't know, maybe Miyazaki just thought they'd look cool." That is certainly a possibility, for sure, but I guess, I don't really have a grasp on it myself, but based on what I said in the previous episode, you might be able to, on the theory that I presented in the previous episode of the significance of the Forbidden Woods, you might be able to guess where I'm going with this. But first I would like to note, and I don't know if this is of any significance whatsoever, but so even though I haven't played much Bloodborne over the last month, I have been playing a decent amount of Scholar of the First Sin, working on some PvP builds for live stream stuff, so you'll have to forgive me if throughout this episode I confuse the touchpad with the start button, because in Scholar of the First Sin they're reversed for some reason. So what I was looking for was this, and under special attack it says strength of slow/rapid poison added to attack, and the extent that attack is raised versus kin, and severely transformed beasts. So I don't know about you, but I think that the kin logo looks remarkably similar to a snake. So, and I don't know if this can really be taken as evidence, but it seems almost as though that the snakes, which we do find in several of the Chalice dungeons, which ones specifically I can't recall offhand, but we do find the snakes in the Chalice dungeons, the large and the small snake balls. But the symbol that they've chosen to use to represent the kin looks a lot like a snake. So in some way, shape, or form, to me at least, it would seem that A, the snakes are related to the kin, and that B, the snakes we find in the... ouch. The snakes that we find here in the Forbidden Woods emanated from the old underground labyrinth, and so I need to be careful there, because on the basis of the theory I presented in the previous episode, or supposition, whatever you want to call it, maybe theory isn't the right word, the Forbidden Woods is one of the central places where the old underground labyrinth was entered physically. That is to say that if, in fact, the Chalice dungeons are the reflection of the actual old underground labyrinth as it exists, or as it existed at a certain point in time in the waking world, then this place, the Forbidden Woods, would seem to be the end result of something being unearthed deep within the old underground labyrinth that then came and, overwhelmed this settlement here. That presumably, once again, I suggested that this entire place was set up in order to facilitate the excavation of the old underground labyrinth. That would not explain the incredible abundance of gravestones littered all throughout the Forbidden Woods, though. So I'm curious as to whether any of you have any ideas as to how we might explain that. But for me, at least, it would certainly explain the snakes. And if, in fact, we can take as evidence anything, the icon that's used to represent kin, then it would seem that in some way, shape, or form, the snakes are related to the kin. Now, what are kin? That is a much deeper question that I don't believe we'll be able to address today in the context of this particular episode. But it's something that we should certainly be thinking about. So, the shining coins, is that what they're called? Yeah, shining coins. Various coins that are particularly luminous. There are very few uses for spirit change during the hunt, but these will serve as guides through the darkness, or one could save them until morning if it ever comes. The placement of those coins seems to me, at least, if there are a few instances where, of course, the placement of items and the significance of certain items is for gameplay reasons alone and not necessarily for story reasons as well. In this case, it would seem that's very much the case. That reminds me of a comment I received during my blind playthrough of Bloodborne from AJ Sin, one of my oldest viewers. Old in terms of how early he came to my channel versus his age. I'm not sure how old he actually is, but he posted an image in the comments to one of the episodes wherein I was complaining about not being able to find my way through the Forbidden Woods, which, yeah, depicts essentially a circle and just says snakes in the middle. Playing on the fact that, yeah, the Forbidden Woods is a rather labyrinthian place. It can be very, very easy if you don't know exactly where you're going to get lost. And I suspect that will happen at some point over the course of this episode. But yeah, the placement of the strange coins, or the shining coins there, in addition to in the lead up to the Forbidden Woods, right near where we spoke with Alfred last, would seem to me to be a gameplay item placement. And I've said before that, yeah, I do think that for the most part, most items will have some sort of story significance based on where they're placed and whatnot. And this is one case where I believe that, yeah, you can probably hand wave the placement of those items for gameplay reasons. You will notice that we are using a new weapon, that is the rifle spear. We have already read the item description for this weapon, but its importance will need to be readdressed later on once we get our hands on another weapon whose item description can be read in juxtaposition to it. So it is 2 in the morning as I'm recording this, and I am teaching for the first time this semester, both tomorrow and Thursday. But yeah, I was up late now, but I kind of got really wrapped up in preparing for the classes because I'm the type of person that tries to prepare for every eventuality and very much takes seriously his responsibility to his students and wants very much to do whatever he can to help them succeed. So I wound up spending a lot of time putting together handouts for them and stuff that basically I didn't need to do, but as a result I'm kind of wired now. So that's why I decided to record, but you'll have to forgive me if my commentary sounds a fair bit more muted this time versus my usual style, and that's simply because I don't want to wake up any of my neighbors. This item, I believe, is a rune. No, it wasn't a rune. There are a few runes scattered throughout the forest, however, so and I'm already lost because there was a tree branch that we could have climbed over. I opted not to, and now I'm wondering where the heck that was. So that didn't take very long. About 10 minutes before we got lost. Yep, I don't know where that branch was. Which sucks because there is a very important armor set that we need to get our hands on there. And this is, of course, also the home of many, many twin bloodstone shards. And once again, the placement of which you could definitely explain in terms of the gameplay mechanics, but also story progression as well, in the sense that you are not, twin bloodstone shards are not made available to you until a very specific point in the story when, you know, the strength of the enemies actually calls for it. And so this is a large snake ball. Now that I'm getting a closer look at it for the first time in the context of this playthrough, it does seem as though, if you look at the lumps all over it, it kind of reminds me of the and I'm trying to think of the correct medical term for what it is that I think I'm seeing, but it reminds me very much of the, I guess, deformities that the large boars have in the Nightmare of Mensis. It looks almost like they're spots where eyes are trying to protrude, but didn't fully form. And they are, of course, it is, of course, spitting poison at me, which, as we've learned in several of the past episodes, is, you know, through the antidotes, poison is seemingly tied to the Scourge of the Beast, or at the very least, the ailment, I guess, of poison seems to have similar symptoms to that of that which are experienced by people who are afflicted with the Scourge. Very strange, but and you know, obviously it's mostly just speculation, and you can see that on these small snake balls, they don't have those protrusions on their head. Whether they're cysts or pustules, something else, I don't know, but they do seem a bit distinct from their large snake ball counterparts. So yeah, I'm completely lost now. I think we've already been here. Clear deep sea. So we have already picked one up in the Chalice dungeons, but the item descriptions are identical. A secret symbol left by Carol, runesmith of Byrgenwerth. This transcription of the Great One's inhuman voices depicts down-reaching currents. This rune means deep sea and grants augmented resistance. Great volumes of water serve as a bulwark guarding sleep and an augur of the eldritch truth. Overcome this hindrance and seek what is yours. So that would seem to be a little bit of foreshadowing for what's to come once we reach Byrgenwerth. And it is, of course, appropriately placed right next to what I imagine is the Moonside Lake, based on where we are, but that's not entirely clear. My humidifier is making a clicking noise. So if you are hearing that, I apologize. I imagine or at least I hope I will be able to edit that out in post, because otherwise I'll have to stand up and turn it off, and that's going to be a whole other ordeal, so... I do also have 99 insight, so I will need to be mindful. What I've been doing in just about every episode leading up to this one, since we went past the 90 insight mark, is I've been spending 4 or 5 insight at the insight Bath Messenger shop, so that it would be more obvious when we actually have an insight gain. But I did not do that today. As you can see, for example, we have 102 Shaman Bone Blades, and I believe they cost 2 insight each to purchase, so we are stocked up on pretty much everything. I do have a plan as it comes to, as it relates to insight and the amount of insight that we're holding on our person, but you will all have to wait and see what that is, because obviously there are certain parts of the game, such as the Nightmare of Mensis, where we're probably not going to want to have 99 insight. Forgot that we can actually use the rifle spear as a rifle. Okay, so here too, these guys are doing the exact same thing that their counterparts were in that the shortcut building, sort of the halfway point in between Upper Forbidden Woods and Lower Forbidden Woods. So I wonder, the person who was sitting there staring at that corpse in that building was guarding a madman's knowledge. I wonder if this is also madman's knowledge. Nope. Okay, so maybe there's no significance at all to what it was that they were doing. Because I imagine if in fact that was a madman's knowledge, then maybe there would have been something to it, but kind of harder to make that case when they were just kind of mindlessly staring at a corpse that had a bloodstone chunk on it. And I'm trying to keep my eye open here for more evidence that might support my theory that this was in fact an excavation site of sorts for the investigation of the old underground labyrinth. But I've not really seen anything on the lower level that would suggest that in the same way that it did in the upper level. Unless, of course, this lower level is in some way itself part of the old underground labyrinth, but it's not really underground. It's certainly labyrinthian. We only find the snakes on the lower level here. So maybe the line separating the two isn't so clear cut. And I have suggested that in terms of the distinctions between the waking world and the dreamlands, of course, but I'm not sure if that same distinction might potentially apply to the old underground labyrinth. So note the pustules once again. Very interesting. And as we use another antidote, let's remind ourselves of the item description. Used to treat ashen blood, the baffling sickness that ravaged old Yharnam long ago. These tablets only provide short-term relief. The ashen blood ailment eventually triggered the spread of the beastly scourge. So it would seem at least that there is... that the snakes are in some way tied. Maybe they are related genetically in some way, shape, or form. That they're a mutation of the kin. Or maybe there's something about their blood, about the snakes, that was thought to be able to mimic the kin, or to mimic the Great Ones. That it had some property which was thought to be analogous to that of ascended beings. Maybe. Because then it would seem to make sense that if in fact the blood being used in blood ministration was not... And this is another very interesting theory that I've been wanting to talk about, but of course I haven't recorded for so long, there's been no opportunity. There was a post on Reddit, and I can't recall offhand the name of the person who posted it, but this person suggested that the name of the bloodletting beast is, in English, a rather significant mistranslation of the original Japanese name, which, if I recall correctly, translates directly to something like source of the old blood, or something like that, or source of the something about, basically the mistranslation, the actual Japanese text as it was stated by this person, and I don't know how valid a interpretation this is, but the implication of this suggestion is that the blood that is being used in blood ministration is not that of, say, a Bredis, but is actually that of the bloodletting beast, whomever that happens to be, whether it's Lawrence or someone else. I disagreed in this thread, and I will of course provide links so that you can check it out for yourself. I disagreed on the basis of our previous discussions about Miyazaki and how seriously he takes names and what, how names are given, what names to give to things. And how, in that sense, I couldn't imagine that a historically specific term like bloodletting, which, and I covered this in the episode where we explored the Old Underground Labyrinth. I think it was episode 6, Fear the Old Blood, or maybe it was episode 7. That bloodletting is a historically specific term that isn't just, it's not to be taken literally. You don't just use bloodletting as a verb without invoking its historical origins. So I replied in the thread, and I guess just kind of expressed skepticism in a way that is indeed... Oh, I don't know if that's the same tree branch that we were near earlier. In fact, I don't think it is, because this pig wasn't there. Okay, I'll finish my previous thought in just one second, but note the pustules. They're not as pronounced with this fella as they are the ones in the Nightmare of Mensis, but look at the one on the, in front of its rear right leg, in front of its hind leg on the right side. That doesn't look all that unlike that which was covering the large snake balls. But maybe that's just me. I guess I really didn't need to try for that backstab there. And the pigs is something else we'll get to. But basically I expressed skepticism about the idea that the bloodletting beast is somehow the source of the blood that's used in blood ministration, simply because I can't imagine that they would have been so careless as to use such a historically specific term like bloodletting to suggest that someone is being used to harvest blood for others, because bloodletting was not about that. It was not about harvesting blood. It was about returning the body, returning the four humors within the body into balance, bringing them into balance between blood, phlegm, black bile, and yellow bile, I believe are the four humors. And so bloodletting was a medical practice in its time. It seems barbaric today, but in its time, it was a theory that made sense, a medical procedure that made sense. And so in that context, to suggest that the bloodletting is simply a mistranslation of using someone as a harvesting someone's blood, I don't know if FromSoft would be that careless, or that the company with whom they've worked for a very long time in doing their translations, which Miyazaki says in that interview, he works closely with them. I don't know if something like that would have slipped through the cracks, if they would have been that careless in that naming process. But yeah, it's certainly very interesting, and I will, of course, provide a link in the video description so you can check it out for yourself. I'm interested as to whether or not anyone else can weigh in about the original, I believe it's kanji, name for what the kanji reads for that particular boss, whether it does in fact it is in fact that much of a mistranslation. I'm curious about that. So we have the Graveguard robe, manchettes, and kilt. I'm probably mispronouncing manchettes. I'm not sure. Robe of Doris, Graveguard of the Forbidden Woods. Countless bloodied ritual tools hang from its back. Willem kept 2 loyal servants back at Bergenworth. When they were sent into the labyrinth, they encountered the Eldritch Truth and went mad. One became the password gatekeeper, while Doris became a graveguard of the forest. Both remain loyal, even in madness. Truly remarkable. Covered in the blood of untidy rituals, says the manchettes. Pretty remarkable, because that, although the skeleton, the already dead person who led us into the Forbidden Woods, was just wearing normal civilian clothing and not graveguard clothing, but very, very interesting. So whose grave was Doris and the password keeper? Or actually, whose grave was Doris guarding? Because it says very clearly that the other loyal servant was made to be the password keeper. So presumably, that person was the person to whom we gave the password in order to get in here. But what was Doris guarding? I will certainly try to remember to look up that name and see whether there's any significance and to see what its origins are. Because once again, Miyazaki is something he said he takes very seriously, and that I believe he said that he's a bit of a naming geek. to be more precise, that he loves coming up with names for things. And for someone to love coming up with names for things, that seems to me to be a pretty big hint that there is a lot of lore hidden in, the etymology of certain names, and, all of the information that may or may not be contained therein, which you'll recall in one of the previous episodes I use as the basis for my my supposition that Runesmith Carol was actually a woman and referred to, I don't even recall the name of it's been far too long since. I will be trying to record with more regularity than once a month, but currently I am aiming for both of my series, for this and for Dark Souls, to at least record, to have an episode released every 2 weeks. It is my hope that once the semester calms down a little bit, and my preparation, I hit a groove in my preparation for comprehensive examinations, because currently I'm in addition to teaching and everything else, I'm reading 5 books a week and writing what basically amounts to a 2,500 word essay every week as well. So my time right now is rather limited, and I'm trying to remember how exactly we're supposed to get up to the Graveguard Hood, because we do have some important business to take care of down there. But first I want to try and get to that hood before we move on, because given the fact that the set is separated in that way, I can only imagine that it does actually contain some unique lore. And this guy just summoned those snake balls. So as Neo Lucky suggested in our comments that we read out earlier, it would seem that there was not much of a person left there, and that those things are more or less completely being controlled by, the parasite represented by those snakes. And I have said that we are going to talk a little bit more about the, parasitic influences, or the abundance of parasitic infections that seem to be exist throughout the game. But that will require us to actually be in a different context before I can return to that thought. So just keep in mind that it is something that we will be discussing in greater detail later, and maybe at that point we'll be able to figure out what exactly is the deal with those guys, with those huntsmen. For now, it seems, I think, not at all unreasonable to suggest that, once again, that this was an excavation site for the old underground labyrinth, and that the snakes who seem to share some sort of genetic likeness with the kin, and that isn't to say that they are themselves related to Great Ones, because kin aren't necessarily Great Ones, but it does seem as though there's some... And strangely enough, here too, just as we saw in the Grand Cathedral, there are effigies to the amygdala, to the false gods, as they're called in the guide, I believe. They look just like peanuts, but maybe the people who were stationed here to investigate the old underground labyrinth came into contact with an amygdala there, began worshipping them or it as a god, and also baby celestials as well. I didn't notice the celestials, in fact, until just now. Very, very strange, but also interesting. These aren't like the ones in the Grand Cathedral, which are fully formed and, facing in symmetrical, that are designed. They're facing each other, they're holding polearm weapons, very symmetrical and orderly. These ones are kind of coming out of the ground, almost as though they're emerging from the old underground labyrinth. I don't know. But none of this explains the graves, which is, once again, something that's one piece of the puzzle that doesn't make a lot of sense to me at this point. Okay, we have still not made our way to that mask. But we might have to come back to that in a little bit, because we have some other very important business to deal with first. First, notice these things that look very much to be, they look like fireflies. Distinct, of course, from the bright bugs in Dark Souls 2, but which move around with a great deal of urgency. Whereas these, they just kind of float about. So I have no idea what they might be. But this is the only place in the game, as far as I'm aware, where you see anything like this. So I don't know what that could mean. I actually didn't need to ride this one all the way up, but I'm so used to doing that because of the one on the upper level, where you actually have to open the gate. In the previous episode, you will recall, of course, that we spent a fair bit of time in Iosefka's clinic. And we found there that the afflicted beggar had been transformed into a celestial. And if we can get the camera to cooperate here, which it doesn't appear as though that's going to happen. Ah. Oh, he sees us, damn it. Hi, friend. And we discussed the possibility that these things, these celestials, or these celestial emissaries, I can't recall what they're exactly called, that I referenced a Redgrave post on Reddit where he talked about how these seem to have been made by Yosefka or Imposter Yosefka or whatever, whomever was that was in charge of administering whatever treatment it is that turned people seemingly into these things. That, yeah, they had, in a manner of speaking, in a certain way, been cleansed of the beast in them. So, I didn't mean to suggest that they had ascended. And in reading some of the comments and rewatching the episode, it seems almost as though it does seem, from my perspective, almost as though I am suggesting that. But they seem not to have ascended, but to have been, they're the product of an attempt at ascension. That, simply put, these are humans who have had the beast inside of them removed. So once again, we are talking about beasthood and humanity not as though they are separate things, as though they exist in a binary with a, neat and tidy demarcation between them, but that there is a beast inside of every human. And that is just at our core, that is what we are. We are beasts. And someone also mentioned in the comments that even though those Celestials, the two that we just fought, those don't seem like they're very ascended. These two over here do at least have some different abilities. They are, in a way, more ascended, or even more distant from beasthood than were those two Celestials we just encountered. And someone pointed out that the attack that they use, it's simply just a call beyond. So, once again, suggesting that these are simply humans whom the Healing Church, or the School of Mensis, or the Choir attempted to ascend. Attempted to make them, to, get rid of their beastliness, because if our beastliness is considered to be the thing that is holding us back, get rid of the beast inside of us, and then, it would seem logical that we would ascend from there. But, yeah, there's not really all that much special about these things. And certainly, they don't seem to have the most enviable existence. And another question that, of course, that this raises is, where did these ones come from? It seems almost as though, just given the proximity of where we are, it seems just that they may perhaps have escaped from Yosefka's clinic. That seems to me the likeliest explanation. But how did they get all the way down here? And any of the Celestials that you encounter in Yosefka's clinic seem very, very docile and passive. What is it about these Celestials that would have led them to, actively escape and seek refuge for one reason or another in this spot, together with each other? This is just Madman's Knowledge, which maybe that'll give us a further clue. And so, more to the point, or to my point from just a minute ago, the indescribable sound is a broadcast with the caster's own vocal cords, which begs the question, what terrible things lurk deep within the frames of men? So there's a beast inside of all of us. These are not ascended beings. They are beings who were subjected to experiments that the aim of which was to, see if you could ascend human beings. And the logic for that would seem to be just remove and just to be clear, most of this, like 90% of this, is complete unbounded speculation. So I'm not communicating any canonical lore here, but it seems basically that this is just what happens to humans when you get rid of all of their humanity. When you not all of their humanity, I should correct myself. When you try to take the beast out of the human, this is what you're left with. And of course, we have the anti-clockwise metamorphosis. Why am I looking there? A secret symbol left by Carol, runesmith of Bergenworth. The twisted cross means metamorphosis. Rotated anti-clockwise, this rune boosts stamina. The discovery of blood made their dream of evolution a reality. Metamorphosis and the excesses and deviation that followed was only the beginning. So I don't know. I think that is, a rather interesting way of looking at it. Again, I'm not saying it's right because it is mostly just my own speculation in the moment just now. In just, reading through some of the comments before I started recording, trying to figure out what they were. And in reviewing the previous episode and how, I made it sound as though almost that, they were ascended human beings. They are the product of an attempt at ascension, but a failed attempt. But I'm just repeating myself now. So let's try and find our way to the Graveguard Mask, shall we? Alright, I'm at about the point where I'm about to say screw it, because my computer sounds like it's about to up and die, and I'm at over an hour in my recording right now. It is all thanks to footing, indeed. So let's just move on. I will look to the Bloodborne Fextralife wiki in order to get my hands on the... Unless the whole time I should have just moved on regardless. And I think that may in fact be the case. Let's see. Dissipating Lake. A Carol rune that transcribes inhuman sounds. This transcription of the Great One's inhuman voices ripples like a watery reflection. This rune means lake, and those who memorize it enjoy reduced bolt damage. So, pretty much the same as the Deep Sea rune that we picked up earlier. I'm not sure. I wonder whether there might be any significance to, and maybe it's an Eastern religion or culture thing. That's just a murky, damp blood gem, I believe. to the differences between lakes and seas. Because I'm not sure otherwise what significance there might be in terms of, the specifics of the difference between the lake and sea runes, because they both more or less share the same item description. So here again, we have another one of these graves. So I really don't know what to make of them. Sorry, snakes, that you didn't even get to. And we're actually at maximum blood vials. So clockwise metamorphosis. The twisted cross, the twisted cross means metamorphosis. Rotated clockwise, this rune boosts HP. The discovery of blood made their dream of evolution a reality. Metamorphosis and the excesses and deviation that followed were only the beginning. So more or less the same as, not more or less, basically the same as the anti-clockwise metamorphosis. So I wonder whether there might be something to that, to the distinction between clockwise and anti-clockwise and the metamorphosis, indicating perhaps the difference between different attempts at ascension. Something I need to think about, and I hope you will. I've given you all something to think about as well. How are we going to handle this boss fight? I'm going to use something I learned from Franz, a German spy, during his casual couch playthrough of Bloodborne. Based on the item I just equipped, you can probably guess what's about to happen, or at least what I'm about to attempt. So here we go. Okay, that didn't work nearly as well as I thought it was going to, but that was still pretty good. So they dropped Blood Rapture. Blood Rapture is the raw euphoria of the warmth of blood, restores HP with visceral attacks, one of the darker hunter techniques. This rune resonates with servants of the Queen, carrier of the Child of Blood, who yearn for their queen's blood with little hope of requitement. For them, they find solace in blood rapture that serves as a surrogate for their desires. So recall that, and again I apologize, I don't remember who exactly made this comment, on they presented a theory about the Shadows of Yharnam, in relation to our discussion about the Gosh, my memory is not working very well right now. In relation to the keepers of the, what was it? The keeper of the old lords, suggesting that perhaps the shadows were, the unimmortalized versions. And I'm butchering the theory here. It was actually very interesting and very compelling, but so that's, once again, I apologize to whomever it was that posited this theory, because I'm not doing it any justice, and also for not remembering your name. But they suggested that, yeah, the Shadows of Yharnam would seem to perhaps be an analog to the underground keepers, that they were sort of like the keepers of the above ground. Again, I'm probably butchering it, but I retorted by pointing out that the Shadows of Yharnam would seem to be a play on words, that they're not very good at doing this job, but they do seem to be the bodyguards of Yharnam, the Pthumerian queen. And I had almost completely forgotten that they actually dropped this rune, which seems to confirm it all but for certain, that is in fact what their role is, that they are bodyguards, or they are servants of the queen, carrier of the child of blood, and they yearn for their queen's blood with little hope of requitement. So they yearn for their queen's blood, and rather than actually giving them her blood, she says, well, as sort of a consolation prize, I guess, they get to be her bodyguard and to feast on the blood of the people who are, who mean to do her harm. So they're serving her in that way. And also the name of this lamp here, so the name of this boss room, is the Forbidden Grave. So once again, this would seem to be the missing link in the theory that I've been crafting in the last few episodes together with each of you, about the significance of the Forbidden Woods. And the grave aspect of it is the thing that just doesn't really make much sense to me. There's nothing really legible here that I can see, and I certainly don't recognize the script that, is apparently written there. But this is a very interesting place. We have, once again, bones built seemingly into the foundation of this place. Maybe this is in some way, shape, or form. Maybe these are memorials to all of the people who died in, the excavation of the old underground labyrinth. Mass memorials for mass graves. Because I don't understand what purpose these giant gravestones would serve otherwise, if not to, just basically serve the function of providing a gravestone for a bunch of nameless people, all of whom seem to have died in this place. And though you could also say that the implication here is that all of these people are the victims of the Shadows of Yharnam, the shadows, when we entered the boss room, did seem to be walking in this direction, away from Byrgenwerth. So perhaps, they were shadowing, literally, Queen Yharnam, who said, no, I'm fine, just go guard the entrance. And so their positioning in this spot seems to be, something that happens within the flow of the story, and that they're not just camped out here constantly. That when we first come across them as bosses, they are, in that moment, heading towards us and away from Yharnam, who seems to have sent them away. So, but these bones have been here for so long, and they seem to be tied up in the dirt and the ground, and I apologize to any archaeologists who may be watching this, because yeah, I am butchering this explanation, but Yeah, these bodies they seem to have been dug up. This would seem to be in some way, shape, or form an archaeological dig site. But the gravestones, again, no idea. Because there's big ones, but then there's also these small ones, too. So I really don't know. Very, very interesting, though. So as has been the case throughout this playthrough, there were a lot of very interesting and insightful comments left in the comment section of the previous episode. But whereas in past episodes I tried my best to be selective about which comments I addressed and wasn't able to get to as many as I would have otherwise liked to, this time, since it's been such a long time since I've last released an episode, and maybe another couple weeks before I can release another one, I figured I would address more comments than I tend to, simply to kind of make it up to each of you out there. Let me know if that, if that's something you don't want to see, if you don't want to see the episodes going from an hour and 10 minutes to an hour and a half. But if you don't say anything about it, I'll assume that it's fine, and I will continue to take the episode where it happens to go, and to not worry too much about artificially limiting the length, and especially when there are a lot of things I want to discuss. That isn't to suggest, of course, that I'm going to be just reading out and discussing at length comments that, don't necessarily add all that much. But that I'm going to be a little less selective, a little less concise in this last segment, at least for this particular episode. Beginning with a comment from Aaron on the previous episode, who, and I'll just read out what he wrote, with the blue elixir, high ministers use it a lot. It numbs the brain. High members of the church become the worst beasts. Sounds like all that blue elixir makes them more susceptible to transforming into terrible beasts. While also adding that the only real thoughts I have on the poison area before Yosefka's is that perhaps she used it as a drop-off for her experiments. But then it would have to have been a very long time for all of this to build up, and fake Yosefka only appeared this evening after you reach Erden Chapel. The small celestials down in the lower Forbidden Woods have to be part of her experiments, right? So yeah, this was something that I touched on briefly earlier in the episode when we were in the lower Forbidden Woods, and I say touched on briefly because I simply just said I don't know why they're here. It seems strange that they would have gone such a distance from Yosefka's clinic all the way to the Forbidden Woods. But given that we find a white church garb set, or a white church set, in the Forbidden Woods, it would seem that, these experiments or these attempts at ascendance were not necessarily confined to Yosefka's clinic, and that, these preventative, quote-unquote, doctors actually seem to have a mobile presence in addition to, a institutional and structural presence in Yosefka's clinic. Dima Parachute writes that the celestial emissary implies that they are representatives of the human race, possibly created as an attempt to communicate with the Great Ones. I don't think they are ascended. I think ascension is elusive to the people of Yharnam, and Celestial Emissary is an attempt to get more knowledge about it. So it's very doubtful that the blue emissaries are ascension in its form. If anything, ascended people look like what we become in the best ending. These blue beings are phonies. Absolutely. And this was a comment that I read shortly before I started recording. So credits to Dima Parachute for getting the gears working in my head as I approached that part in the lower Forbidden Woods and started thinking about, what the heck they are, which led to my supposition that you could look at them as humanity without the beast, as humanity with the beast stripped out of her. So, very interesting. Jeux Sans Frontières writes, I completely agree that they aren't actually aliens, and they're obviously being made from people by the choir. The oddness of the name interests me, though, given how much talk there is of the cosmos and higher planes. And I should mention that this is a reply to Dima Parachute. The ranged attack, arcane attack that a small number of the Celestials, including the boss version, use looks like a lot like a Call Beyond, which is said to be the result of the Church trying to contact the outer reaches of the cosmos. My take on it is that the Celestials are created from people and didn't physically come from the outer planets, but that a very small number of them are powerful enough to make mental contact with those planets, which is why they manifest a Call Beyond style star energy. So they're emissaries / messengers from the outer planets, in the sense that they're physically in touch with those places and can channel energy from them, but didn't physically originate there. The successful ones may have even traveled there mentally and then returned, in the same way humans can travel back and forth from the Dreamlands, hence them being emissaries / messengers. The other possible explanation is that the big boss version we find in Lumen Flower Gardens is the actual capital E emissary. It's the only one with a named HP bar, which did come from another planet somehow. Maybe the choir accidentally pulled it through, and the human-sized ones are failed attempts to recreate it. Very interesting. Very, very interesting. And once again, throughout the comment section, I think that the most significant insights emerge out of the interactions that take place there. And as always, I'm very, very proud. I have a lot of pride. I feel a lot of pride when reading through the comment section and seeing how civilized civilized and cooperative everyone is, even where there's disagreements. And this is just another prime example of that. But yeah, I wanted to highlight this comment in particular because this is another one I read before I started recording, and this was something that I touched upon, and I just wanted to make explicit that this is what I was referring to when I said someone commented and pointed out that their magic is very similar to a Call Beyond. So, thank you. Ivan Abib writes, when I went into the cave and found all the poison water, I started thinking that if that could actually be the source of the Ashen Blood affliction. All the Healing Church giants inside the cave made me feel good about the idea. I just don't know how that location would be linked to Old Yharnam. Perhaps that location is Old Yharnam's drinking water source. Central Yharnam is right next to Old Yharnam, but below and from the cave we are directly below Central Yharnam, so maybe? I'm a little bit skeptical of this idea, but I thought it was interesting nevertheless, which is why I'm bringing it up. But I'm skeptical of that for the simple reason that there is, no sewer system of any sort from what we can see in that particular location. So it's a very interesting idea, to be sure, but I'm not sure it's one that really can be supported using the evidence in the game. In continuing with discussion of that cave, Jeux Sans Frontières writes, I think your second theory about the cave system being used by the choir to reach Byrgenwerth is actually the more plausible. The quote-unquote front door to Forbidden Woods has been locked for so long that the Watchman has died and decomposed, so I doubt they're using that. Considering we find church giants inside the cave, and outside the cave are Snatchers who were Fermensis and a Healing Church set, it seems like the choir are familiar with the area. We know the choir have a presence in Byrgenwerth, owing to Yuri's appearance there. That is Yuri, the Last Scholar, in particular. So it seems like the caves were being used to go back and forth via the relative secrecy of the graveyard, as opposed to openly going through the door near the cathedral. It would also explain why Imposter Yosefka sets up in that particular clinic. Yes, absolutely, 100%. And this is something that we're going to be talking about the movements of the members of both the choir and the Healing Church as we go forward. Because, yeah, the situatedness, the place where we find Yuri, the Last Scholar, who is where, pretty obviously a member of the choir, is a very interesting thing, and something that, yeah, we're going to be talking about either at some point in the next 2 or 3 episodes. I'll just say that rather than saying in the next episode and then having to continually revise my estimate on that. Nicole Neil Lucky Dubois writes, I too wonder if the cave and excavation site were from the previous civilization. I am by no means knowledgeable on cave formations, but as far as I know, they take a long time to form. I believe perhaps they were already there, excavated once and then a second time, history repeating itself and all of that. Maybe Yharnamites thought they could succeed where Pthumerians failed. Also, the large gravestones being only makes me think of them being Pthumerians due to their size. Oh. Again, I read every single comment as it comes in, but due to the sheer volume of them, the sheer volume of really interesting potential insights, sometimes, when I'm recording gameplay for the following episode, some of them don't immediately come to mind, and this is something that I hadn't considered at all when, throughout the entirety of this episode, I was puzzled and bewildered, really, by the graves, and especially the large ones. And the Pthumerians we saw were in fact rather large, so maybe. Neil Lucky goes on to say that she's of the notion, perhaps, that there possibly is no fake or real Iosefka, that the woman you meet before is the same, but tainted. Finding her blood on a celestial body could mean she was using her blood during a transfusion, perhaps. At first she's unwilling to help, wanting people to stay away, but that after getting a taste of success, she gets drunk off the results. But more of that discussion may be better later in the playthrough. This is a very interesting theory, and one, I guess, that really tests the limits of evidence that exists beyond the fourth wall. And that is to say that if you look in the credits, there are actually 2 different voice actors credited for Iosefka, the real Iosefka and the imposter Iosefka. I don't think that's actually how they're listed, but there are 2 different voice actors, and there is a distinct, at least for me, they sound somewhat similar if you're not paying attention, but the shift in tone and the change in the voice, I think, is probably more, let me put it this way, more than you can explain by saying that she got drunk off of the results. And it's a very interesting way of putting it. If we opted not to break the fourth wall in looking for answers, then perhaps that's something that would be plausible, but as it is, within the bounds of how it is that we've kind of established our investigation so far, I'm not particularly convinced by this, but others may be, and it's certainly a very valid and interesting way of looking at it. Sir Micho writes about teleportations. I'm a bit confused. If you are not physically taken to the Chalice Dungeons through teleportation, then how would you explain teleportations that happen in Yahar'gul? We're physically there, for sure. Yes, absolutely. But we're also physically present in the Dreamlands as well. It's just another place, it's another plane of existence. Because we're there, as I understand it at least, doesn't necessarily mean that we're not physically there. Just because they're called the Dreamlands doesn't mean that it's not a real place and that, you can't feel the dirt beneath your feet. And perhaps this is delving a little bit too much into, I guess, Plato's allegory of the cave. How do you really know, though, that you're physically anywhere? So that's one thing. The second thing I would point out is simply that just because you can teleport from one place in Yahar'gul to another from within the waking world doesn't preclude the possibility of the teleportation to the Chalice Dungeons being a teleportation to the Dreamlands. I see no reason why there can't be intra-dimensional and interdimensional teleportation. Both can exist, for sure, at least in my view, but I'm interested in hearing what everyone else thinks about that. On the subject of the afflicted beggar and my suggestion that maybe he was looking at his hands while he was, after having been quote-unquote ascended. Dark Mastery points out, the first celestial thingy was the Afflicted Beggar. Yeah, didn't look like it was looking at its hands in a what the fuck happened to me type way. It looks more like when it was eating those people in the Forbidden Woods, same animation. And yeah, as I mentioned, this is something that several people pointed out. That's something I definitely should have noticed, but I didn't. But at the same time, Diva Parachute replied with something that's very interesting, saying, I think it's both. It's definitely meant to give us a hint about who he is. His actions are something like this. He is trying to do the same thing he did before, but at the same time realizes he is not who he was before. Sort of like the Hollows are in Dark Souls 2. They got the farming instruments and they remember how to farm, but they have no business farming now. And I think that is a brilliant way of putting it, and certainly gives me an out that I'm not sure I deserve, but it is a very, very valid point. An even better example than, I believe Demon Parachute is referring specifically to the peasants in Brightstone Cove, Sildora. But I think an even better example in the context of Scholar of the First Sin are the Hollow Soldiers in the Force of Fallen Giants. The Hollow Drangleic soldiers who, despite the fact that the giants are long either dead, enslaved, or elsewhere, they remain firmly committed to fighting these giant trees. These trees that were once giants but are now just trees. They sit there, they stand there swinging their halberds at it, trying in vain to attack it and hurt it, but, their halberds just keep bouncing off of it. They sort of look up at it, just really confused and bewildered by the whole thing. But, because they're hollow, because they've been transformed in that way, they really don't have the presence of mind to be able to, figure out, okay, maybe the war is over and I'm attacking a tree. But yeah, just something that I thought was a very, very interesting and insightful way of pointing to how the blend of lore and gameplay mechanics in the Souls games takes place in such a way, or exists in such a fashion, that you can really have so many different interpretations of something as simple as an animation being reused. And in some ways, that can be really frustrating and problematic, because at a certain point you might want to just throw up your hands and say, well, you can explain anything like that. But that's kind of how real history works, and real, the real acquisition of knowledge. Because when you're acquiring knowledge, it's not just a thing that exists. It's something that is formed through, in part through consensus building, and through, the very human process of establishing criteria of what is and what is not knowledge. And so it's a productive thing. You're not just going out and acquiring knowledge that exists there passively. But that's, I'm digressing big time there. So, but yeah, thank you to both of you for a very interesting and thoughtful exchange. Bane Clandestine writes, Imposter Yosefka also says something interesting. She calls the player character a moon-scented hunter. So does the Vileblood Queen. I would like a confirmation on this, but it seems only women in the game identify us as moon-scented. The male Yharnamites can never truly identify the smell, neither can the Chapel Dweller. Does anyone remember if Alfred addresses our scent? I don't believe Alfred does. The only male I can recall that remarks on it is when fighting Gascoigne. As he becomes more aroused in battle, he comes close and asks, "What's that smell?" It's enough to make a man sick, I believe is what he says. What scent drives heterosexual men insane? I'm not sure I fully understand that part, but it would seem women in Bloodborne, or in the Bloodverse, have an esoteric or almost pagan knowledge to identify us tied to their being. I did some research as well into Wiccanism and have found, interestingly, the flower gardenia, a white flower, is used in something called Esbat rituals tied to the moon. Lastly, if the hunter's mark turned right side up is not a vagina, well, I don't know what to say. on the point about heterosexual men, I would, and maybe it's just that I'm not really understanding how that fits into the rest of your post. Gascoigne makes that remark if the Paleblood Hunter is a woman as well, so I'm not sure. But again, I think I'm just kind of confused by that one. I did want to point out that while the Chapel Dweller is apparently male, and apparently doesn't recognize us at first, and is apparently blind, doesn't necessarily mean that it's because he's a male, and that somehow males are unable to smell the Paleblood Hunter. And the reason for that is simply that all of Oud and Chapel is basically awash in incense. So it's not necessarily that he can't smell us because he's a male. It could also be because of the incense. But I believe that the bigoted old man does say that he can smell our lies, but that's not a direct reference, of course, to, a smell as in he can smell literally. It seems more of a metaphorical usage. But I guess to your point, Gascoigne's daughter does say that she recognizes us by our scent. So yeah, very interesting. That this is something that we're going to have to return to later, because for now I'm not really sure if there's anything more I can add to it. Koipop, drawing on Neolucky's comment from the previous episode, made a very interesting observation when he writes that Neolucky's comment paints the hunter's dream as a sort of womb, which works perfectly with the umbilical cords and the childhood's beginning ending. So yeah, I that's something that hadn't occurred to me, and that's very interesting. And speaking of Koipop, this is something that for the last couple weeks I've been waiting to give him credit for. But you may recall earlier in the series, in I believe it was the third or fourth episode, that Koipop wrote this: Ludwig is written very similarly to the way Artorias was prepare to die, so he may yet await us. And at the time I said that, that was brilliant, and that I really hoped that this is true. And as it turns out, Koipop was right. Was 100% right. And we are very, very fortunately going to be able to apparently meet Ludwig, or at least fight Ludwig. And yeah, I'm just so very excited for that. But I did want to, once again, just give a round of applause to Koipop for actually being so prescient and being able to sense that there was something missing that was almost assuredly going to be filled in later, and he was 100% right about that. While we're doing shoutouts, I wanted to give a shoutout and to direct all of you to a video published by Jeux Sans Frontières on September 18th. And it's called Bloodborne Up Close. The first part focusing on the nightmare fauna. And I, rather than attempting to once again summarize it or to butcher kind of an explanation of what it is, I'll just read out what he wrote in the video description. In a manner not unlike the late Steve Irwin, I get up close to Bloodborne's enemies and record them while they tried to eat me. This episode covers the giant lost child, Loran Silverbeast, and crawlers, all found within the Nightmare Frontier. So yeah, it's that way of describing it, that it's in a manner not unlike the late Steve Irwin, really captures it well. And there's a delightful Australian, I believe, accent, and you forgive me if I've misrecognized that, but a delightful Australian accent on display there to boot. So it's really quite wonderful and very, very well done. And I'm not sure, Jeux Sans Frontières, if you have a all that much experience with video editing or with narration, but I must say it's very, very good, and highly, highly recommended that anyone who's watching this, if you're interested in this, you will, of course, be interested in this video. So if you click on the lower right hand side of your screen, as always, it will take you to that video in a new window, so you can watch that and come back and rejoin us for the rest of this episode. But yeah, very, very cool, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing what Jeux Sans Frontières comes up with next. I'd be remiss if I didn't also give a shout out to the Lore Hunter, who very kindly made a post about this series and directing people to check it out on his blog, the Lore Hunter, and you will find a link in the video description below. It's a very, I don't typically like blogs all that much, but everything is organized in a very accessible but also interesting and unique way on this blog, and he does a great job of curating the lore content that is spread across various disparate communities that exist out in the interwebs. So I would highly recommend that you check out his blog, and yeah, you will find a link in the video description below. My thanks to you once again, Lore Hunter, for saying very kind words and for recommending this series to other people as well. So I think that just about does it for this episode. I do have something very special planned for the next episode, so I hope that you will all join me then. So thank you very much for joining me, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.